Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Reason We Learn. I'm Deb Philman, mom, homeschooler, educator. So today I'm probably going to get myself into a heap of hot water, but I have to do it. I don't ordinarily comment on just, current events or celebrity news or things like that, especially if it also uh, encompasses sort of the political realm. But I can't resist today because it crisscrosses into education, because the only reason this controversy is even happening is that people have not been taught their history, or they've been taught just enough to get it wrong, or just enough to oversimplify. So we often hear people comparing things to Hitler. We heard Trump compared to Hitler. Anybody we don't like compared to Hitler. Anybody who is, a strong speaker and says things we don't like, or that sounds a little bit racist or whatever to our ears, we call Hitler, which of course is gross oversimplification and shouldn't be done. I'm not going to go as far as to say it's offensive. I mean, there are some comparisons that are offensive, but I think, those are just inept. Okay. But every so often, comparisons to things like the rise of, the Nazi regime, or in particular, the progression of Nazi persecutions, is apt. And yet we've gotten in such a knee-jerk habit of saying, terrible comparison, that we just jump on it and, kill the messenger. The other thing is, because we've taught history out of context. The other thing is, right now, there are people who still want the freedom to use the Nazi comparison willy-nilly at will to demonize their political opponents, and not to, thoughtfully compare, anything to Nazism. And this is happening right now. Mandalorian star Gina Carano is under fire for controversial social media posts. Well, what did she do? What did she post that was so offensive that it got her fired? Disney fired her because people were complaining of hurty feelings, or, it was so offensive. This is what she wrote on an Instagram post. She says, Jews were beaten in the streets, not by Nazi soldiers, but by their neighbors, even by children. Because history is edited, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. How is that any different from hating someone for their political views? The post, which was originally made on a different Instagram account, read, okay. Another photo featured a person with several cloth masks covering their entire face, and the caption said, "Meanwhile in California." Don't know why that's controversial. Okay, that's happening. And there were some other posts, and I'm not going to really get into those, because the bottom line is Disney has a right to fire or hire whomever they want. So I'm not defending her job. Okay, private company, they can fire her. I think it's wrong. I think it's stupid. Nick Cannon said things that were blatantly anti-Semitic. He was like fired for 5 minutes and then, promptly hired back. But that's their business. That's not what I'm trying to address. What I'm trying to address is the mob descending on not only this woman, but anybody who wants to say, in that particular one, she has a point. She's kind of not completely wrong with that. And say, terrible comparison, horrible comparison. Ironically, many of the same people, including journalists, who didn't bat an eyelash when Anderson Cooper compared the January 6th riot at the Capitol to the Rwandan genocide that killed over 1 million people. I mean, that's apparently okay, or 9/11. It was worse than 9/11. As somebody who lost people in 9/11, I do find that kind of offensive. That they're not even remotely comparable, but nobody bats an eyelash at that. But for today's purposes, and because I want to talk about education and how we're not teaching history in context, and the consequences of that might end up being dire, I want to spend a little time on the substance of her tweet, or her Instagram post, which is specifically how the progression happened. She's not wrong. Let's deal with the facts before us, shall we? They did do that. The progression happened gradually. Let's take a look at the timeline, all right? The Holocaust, timeline of Jewish persecution. This is just Jews, but they persecuted way more than Jews, okay? But just taking Jews, because that's who she talked about. Let's go to 1933. So now 1932, we have, the election, blah, blah, Nazi party attains 230 seats. And so in 1933, you have Hitler and former Prime Minister Franz von Papen discuss his future. So 1933, this is happening, okay? In 1933, in February of 1933, this was published in Der Stürmer. It was a publication devoted primarily to anti-Semitic propaganda, but, there it was. This was also the organ of the Nazi Party. So this would be kind of like, if you had the CNN of the day, and this is the party that had the most votes, CNN, let's just say, or MSNBC or something like that. They become the official organ of the party in power. The motto of the paper is, "The Jews are our misfortune." Now, what would happen if you change Jews to Republicans? Does it sound completely far-fetched that in a news outlet that is basically the mouthpiece of the Democratic Party today would say the Republicans are our misfortune? Oh, woe is us. We have to deal with the Republicans, those terrible, obstructionist Republicans. If they don't vote to impeach the president, they're in our way and it's terrible. And oh my God. And because that's kind of what's happening. You don't hear this or that specific person. You don't hear this or that specific vote. It's Republicans as a whole. We are talking about the other party. Okay, there's two prominent parties in the United States, and that's the other one, and it's just Republicans. There's no specificity to that at all. And they're not even talking the Republicans in Congress, just anywhere. Then extrapolate that out, replace Jews with white supremacists, which is also a gross overstatement, right? And we also know that they've conflated, people like the reporters at CNN have conflated white supremacists with Republicans frequently lately, okay? So this is in 1933. There's no yellow stars yet even. Nobody's even wearing a yellow star. People are going about their business. They're still, holding down jobs and living in their homes and things. It's just newspapers are writing, "Oh, isn't it unfortunate? We have to deal with this misfortune of ours." Okay, so now we go forward to Bloody Sunday riots lead to the death of one communist and injuries to hundreds of other citizens, including Jews. Okay, well, we had riots last summer. Lots of people were injured. Now, again, we're talking about Republicans today, and we're talking about quote unquote white supremacists, but we're also hearing how some people are white adjacent, right? Or there's, Asians are not white adjacent if they're too successful. Even Black African immigrants, if they're too successful, are white adjacent, or they have white privilege because they've internalized white racism. We're seeing attacks almost daily in San Francisco on Asian elderly people, and nobody wants to talk about the racial angle of that. But riots, people burning down whole city blocks, etc. That happened last summer. Here's, one communist died. We've seen many people die. We've seen people beaten up, killed, knocked over, etc. It's happening now like once a week. Okay. So now we have, somebody sermonizing about the dangers of Jews. And then, now Hitler wins over a group of leading German industrialists at a meeting designed for that purpose. So it's like, and then we have the Reichstag fire. So we've already had what some people are calling our Reichstag fire with the Capitol protest. I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories. I mean, I don't think it was an inside job the way some people say, but I do think that the FBI knew about it and heard, chatter about what was going to happen. And that's why they didn't have the protection there. I do think that. I'll go out on a limb and say I think that contributed to it. So we're just, we're still in 1933. Okay. Now we have the Jüdische Kulturbund is established in Berlin. Okay, the German government prohibits the practice of ritual Jewish slaughter of animals for meat. So they're starting to ratchet things up, and but we're still in 1933. Look how many years until people started going to the camps. Here's 1939 invasion of Poland. Okay, there were German Jews who were trying to leave and get out, and they're wearing stars by now, but we're talking several years. She's saying this today. She's talking about neighbors turning on neighbors. Now, you might also be asking, okay, but you're still not connecting the dots for me. How does this connect to today with the neighbors on neighbors? Well, let's talk about that. I have a book here. It's called The Ominous Parallels. This was written in 1982, and I'm going to read some passages for you, and then you tell me if any of it sounds remotely familiar to things you've heard, even the things that your kids are being taught in school. Okay? Change the words around a little bit, but there's some eerie similarities. Okay, so here's the theory. It is thus necessary that the individual should finally come to realize that his own ego is of no importance in comparison with the existence of his nation, that the position of the individual ego is conditioned solely by the interests of the nation as a whole. Think common good. Okay. That above all, the unity of a nation's spirit and will are worth far more than the freedom of the spirit and will of any individual. That this state of mind, which subordinates the interests of the ego to the conservation of the community, is really the first premise for every truly human culture. The basic attitude from which such activity arises we call, to distinguish it from egoism and selfishness, idealism. By this we understand only the individual's capacity to make sacrifices for the community, for his fellow man. Now think about this last year, the pandemic. It's not about you. It's about other people. You should stay home. You should wear a mask. Well, you should do this and you should do that. It's not about you. You selfish individuals. Ugh, this creepy individualism that you have. It's just going to be the death of us. Okay, let's keep going. The higher interests involved in the life of the whole must here set the limits and lay down the duties of the interests of the individual. Okay? The people form a true organism, a living unity. Unity. There's a word, unity. Whose cells are individual persons. Whose cells are individual persons. The people are not individual, but the cells of the unified whole. Okay? Let's see. In reality, therefore, appearances to the contrary notwithstanding, there is no such thing as an isolated individual. No man is an island. Have you heard that recently? Or an autonomous man. If you think you didn't build that. You think you operate as an individual? No, you don't. You're part of the whole. Just as the individual is to be regarded merely as a fragment of the group, the Nazis said, so his possessions are to be regarded as a fragment of the group's wealth. By the way, all that little stuff I just quoted, that was Hitler, in case you were wondering. Yeah. Private property, as conceived under the liberalistic economic order, was a reversal of the true concept of property, wrote Huber, one of his influences. Yes. This private property represented the right of the individual to manage and to speculate with inherited or acquired property as he pleased without regard for the general interests. German socialism had to overcome this private, that is unrestrained and irresponsible view of property. So irresponsible. No one person should have so much wealth. Ugh, it's so irresponsible to the whole. And think of your carbon footprint. You horrible, evil individual. Except if you agree with us, then you can have a private jet. All property is common property. The owner is bound by the people, the needs of the whole. Yep. See, the only difference between them and Marxists is they didn't advocate for public ownership of all the property. They just demanded that the government oversee and run the nation's economy. So, it's sort of like a distinction without a difference. And then, moving on. I'm just reading these things. You just have to decide for yourself if any of it sounds remotely familiar. Let's see. But the Nazis defended their policies and the country did not rebel. Not rebel. Nobody's rebelling, really. Not really much. It accepted the Nazi argument. Selfish individuals may be unhappy, the Nazis said, but what we have established in Germany is the ideal system, socialism. In its Nazi usage, this term is not restricted to a theory of economics. It's to be understood in a fundamental sense. Socialism, for the Nazis, denotes the principle of collectivism as such, and its corollary statism in every field of human action, including but not limited to economics. To be a socialist, says Goebbels, is to submit the I to the thou. Socialism is sacrificing the individual to the whole. Joseph Goebbels, chief propagandist of the Nazi Party. You selfish individual, your needs, your need to breathe, your need to come and go, your need to travel, your need to go to church, your need to run your business. Selfish, selfish, selfish. So selfish. Let's see. Yeah, so that's that. Let's see, moving right along. What else can I find for you? See if you find anything. Many writers have noted similarities between America today. This was in 1982. He wrote this book. Just forgot to mention that. And Germany before Hitler, then have shrugged off their own observations, succumbing to the notion spread by today's intellectuals that it's bad history to compare two different countries. This notion itself, a symptom of our current crisis, means that there are no principles governing human action, and it's bad history to learn from history. Sound familiar? The similarities, however, cannot be shrugged off. Our crisis is real in 1982. The crisis is the fact that our country, the United States of America, the freest, the most productive, and the most moral country in the world, is now moving in Hitler's direction. America is moving towards a Nazi form of totalitarianism. It has been doing so for decades. It's been doing so gradually, by default, and for the most part unknowingly, but it is doing so systematically and without significant opposition in every cultural area, from science and education to art and religion to politics and economics. The trend is now unmistakable. And he does point out, of course, there are differences, fundamental differences, that I'm sure people, would point out. So that's very obvious, but it's just worth noting, right? And then moving along. One of the things that characterizes academia and education right now that has led us to be able to accept so much of this is the distinction between intelligence and conscience. What good is it to be smart and know facts if you have no empathy, if you have no compassion, if you're not tolerant? We need to teach our children this compassion and acceptance and diversity and equity and inclusion, and they're wrapping it all up in a nice little bow, which is really just a fancy way of saying anti-intellectualism. Don't use it. Reason is white. The scientific method is white. Facts are white. Being on time is white. Your commitment to all this rigid, objective reality is white. So bad. And it's individualistic, which is just evil because it's against the common good. And we need equity. We must distrust the intelligence and the conscience, states Hitler, and must place our trust in instincts, our lived experience. My truth. My truth. Trust your instincts, your feelings, or whatever you like to call them, says Hitler. The last clause indicates the latitude permitted to the Nazis on this question. They were free to advocate and did advocate privately and publicly every non-rational source of alleged knowledge that men have ever invented, including revelation, intuition, magic, astrology, my lived experience, your lived experience, my perception, your perception, my feelings, your feelings. Words hurt me. Words are violence because feels. Okay. So we're now not thinking, we're feeling. We're feeling. Feelings are important. Feelings are so important. You can lose your job. You can lose your career. All it takes is somebody gang up and you say their feelings are, whether they were or they weren't, is irrelevant. Same with Nazis. They didn't really care about this stuff, but it was a means to an end. Right? Thought is eliminated. And because this is the state of mind I require, because it secures me to the best sounding board for my speeches, he's at least saying the quiet parts out loud. He's speaking now internally, by the way. I order everyone to attend the meetings where they become part of the mass, whether they like it or not. Intellectuals and bourgeois as workers. I mingle the people. I speak to them only as the mass. Okay? So think about your child now. Let's find you on this matrix. You're not you little individual person who decide to be what you want to be. No, you are what I say you are. You're part of the mass. So now I put you in this group of mass. But now you have intersectionality, so you're part of these other masses. So guess what? You're part of just the masses. We just break away the individual sense of autonomy and agency and put you with some mass, a group of mass, whatever. Pit the masses against each other, but you're all part of the mass. You're just a cog in the giant machine. The masses are like an animal that obey its instincts. They do not reach conclusions by reasoning. Again, he's saying the quiet parts out loud. Your kids' teachers and schools may or may not be conscious of this being the philosophy underpinning what they're doing, but it is, I assure you. You don't get to what they're doing by reason. Speaking of which, let's just skip ahead because I don't want this video to be endless for you. Because Peikoff, who wrote this book, writes an entire chapter called Hitler's War Against Reason. Statism and the advocacy of reason are philosophical opposites. Remember I've said on this channel before, you can't have both. You cannot have what the woke is teaching and teach critical thinking. They don't go together. They cannot coexist, neither in a philosophical system nor in a nation. If men uphold reason, they will be led ultimately to conclude that men should deal with one another as free agents, settling their disputes by an appeal to the mind, i.e. by a process of voluntary rational persuasion. If men reject reason, they will be led ultimately to conclude the opposite, that men have no way to deal with one another at all, no way except physical force, wielded by an elite endowed with an allegedly superior mystic means of cognition. They have the knowings. And guess what? It's not their job to teach you what it is. Accept it on faith, or you're on the outs. It's not their job. They have the knowing. They have the knowledge. Their knowledge is the right knowledge. Your knowledge is wrong. Okay? So that's that. And then he says, this is Hitler now speaking. We are now at the end of the age of reason, Hitler declared to Hermann Röchling. The intellect has grown autocratic and has become a disease of life. The life of a race and of its people is mystical synthesis, a manifestation of the soul, now this is Rosenberg writing, which cannot be explained by the logic of reason nor by causal analysis. Even the most profound, the most learned of intellects touches the surface of things only, writes Gottfried Nies, a young Nazi intellectual. Everything of which we are conscious, all that is thinkable and understandable, is but thin snow on the high mountains of the unconscious. Snow that will quickly melt under the storms of fate, of some intoxication, of the trembling of the soul. Life would rather hide its ultimate secrets in a small folk song heard in the village, blah, 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 blah. All we can do is be moved by it. Feels. My feels, facts are bad. Facts can't possibly cover the knowings of the unknown. And if it doesn't make sense to you and if it's confusing, that's intentional. That's intentional. Yes, it is. That is intentional. Let's see. In the Nazi leadership's view, Rauschning, a one-time friend of Hitler's, reports, the more inconsistent and irrational is their doctrine, the better. What has James Lindsay been telling us? This by design. You can't possibly, you're not supposed to understand it. In fact, you're supposed to walk around feeling like, maybe I am too stupid to understand it. Maybe that was because they went to Harvard and Columbia and Stanford and stuff. And like, that's why and I don't get it because I'm not smart. Maybe, yeah, that's it. I'm not as smart as they are. They have like PhD after their name. Yes. Everything that might have gone into the making up of a systematic, logically conceived doctrine is dismantled as a trifle with sovereign contempt. To all doubts and questions, said Rosenberg, the new man of the First German Empire has only one answer. Nevertheless, I will. So you said, but this doesn't make sense. Like, yep, but I'm doing it anyway. Sound familiar? That's Nicole Hannah-Jones' entire thing. But you're wrong. And these are not facts. Doesn't matter. It's journalism. Yeah, but journalism is still supposed to be fact-based. Nope. Because I said so. And the New York Times backs me up. So it doesn't matter that I'm wrong. Because what matters is what I say matters. Or AOC, who says, it doesn't matter if the facts are not strictly speaking correct.
One of the criticisms of you is that your math is fuzzy. The Washington Post recently awarded you 4 Pinocchios.
Oh, my goodness.
For misstating some statistics about Pentagon spending.
If people want to really blow up one figure here or one word there, I would argue that they're missing the forest for the trees. I think that there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right.
People set us down as enemies of the intelligence, declared Hitler. We are, but in a much deeper sense than these conceited dolts of bourgeois scientists ever dreamed of. Oh, you don't understand the new science. Shut up. Do as we say. An education stressing the intellect, such men charge, places too great a burden on the child and thwarts his emotional development. Oh, that would be terrible. Thwarts your emotional development. What they mean is causes it to develop in a healthy, individualized way so that they cannot be cogs in the machine of the state. That's the emotional development they want. Not that it thwarts the emotional development, period. An education teaches facts and objectivity improperly emphasizes external factors at the expense of the child's inner experience. Does that sound familiar? Lived experience. What Germany needs, they concluded, is a new kind of institution, not called cognition-centered learning schools, but feeling-centered Lebensschulen, life schools. Encouraged by liberal progressives and conservative nationalists alike, the romanticist educators proceeded gradually to supply this need, first in the Empire, then in the Republic. Thus, the schools were ready for the Nazi educators when their time came. In other words, even then, it wasn't Hitler that walked in and said, change all the schools. They were already moving in that direction, just like ours were. Just like ours were. You know, how it's changing. And where did that come from? In Hitler's Germany? Where did that come from? Right. Oh, yeah. That came from the universities. Yes. This is a liberal commentator writing at the time. The most profound error of the social thought of our day is found in the belief that one can demand of scientific knowledge impulses to will and ideal goals. Understanding will never be able to tell us what to believe, what to hope for, what to live for, and what to offer up sacrifices for. Instinct and feeling, illumination and intuitive vision, these are the things that lead us into the realm of forces that determine the meaning of our existence. I'm going to stop there because I could just go on all day. I hope you're starting to see that Gina, while she may or may not be aware of exactly how accurate some of the parallels are, is not wrong. So attacking her without taking a moment to stop and say, well, hang on a second, what did she actually say? She was actually talking about how they did it, that they turned neighbor on neighbor, that they got people philosophically thinking that individuals were selfish, that having a different opinion in and of itself, as long as you could characterize the different opinion as being bad or a threat to people, was dangerous. How dare you have a different opinion? Your different opinion is dangerous. You must be destroyed. How many times have we heard this recently? And now they're teaching it to our children. If you disagree, if you try to fight against the woke education in the school, well, my goodness, what are you? Are you some kind of horrible? Are you one of them? And the irony, of course, is they're saying the them is Nazis. They're equating Republicans with Nazis when their behavior anti-intellectualism, anti-reason, fixation on feelings, fixation on, my inner life and whatever I perceive to be and my feels more important than your facts. And by the way, no diversity of opinion is allowed for all the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everything they say is inside out exactly the way it was there. So the parallel exists. Just because you can't find people goose stepping, just because people have been miseducated to believe that Nazism was the right wing and not just an extreme left wing with lots of autocratic tendencies. Okay, sort of where right and left wings bump into each other. Just because of that doesn't make it a false comparison. It's not. A false comparison is to say that January 6th was just like 9/11 or worse than 9/11. That's a crazy analogy, and I don't see anybody losing their job for that. And lots of people, lots of pundits, lots of news anchors have done exactly that. Oh my God, it was so traumatic. It was just like 9/11 all over again. Oh. Lived experience feels more important than facts. So I had to comment on that because that's what your kids are being taught, and that's why. So if you still want them in those kind of schools, I mean, knock yourself out. I don't see why. They're using your child. They're manipulating your child. They're teaching your child a set of things that are anti-reason, anti-reality, and ultimately really dangerous. If you like this video, I hope you'll like, share, subscribe, comment. That's the video.